So now I actually feature in the story. I was born in the Cambridge Street house itself, in the larger of the back bedrooms, the one that was Mum's, and where I also slept when I visited, as I did regularly in later years. Mum was a bit disappointed, because when she went into labour she hoped that I would be born that day, as it was her wedding anniversary. However, I did not oblige. I waited until just after midnight, so 10th of October is my birthday. Mum chose my name. She said that she just wanted a name she liked that nobody else in the family had. However, even if unknowingly, she did choose a name that connected me with Dad. Jack is a derivative of John, and the Scottish girl's name Jean is the feminine form of John. I'm also told that everyone who saw me as a baby said I looked like Dad. Mum said she ordered me like that to avoid doubt about paternity, with Dad being away. There was a houseful in Cambridge Street, as Auntie and Uncle had two evacuee sisters also staying with them, sharing the smaller back bedroom. They were Joan and Marjorie, known as Marge, from Chiswick, London. They were there from, I believe, 1940 until 1945. Their parents used to visit and even years later kept in touch, being Uncle John and Auntie Ruth to us. I do still speak with Joan occasionally now, and she says that those years were the best of her childhood. She loved living at Bletchley. Things must have been very crowded in the house though, with Joan and Marge sharing the small bedroom and all of us living in the one room downstairs. The house always smelled strongly of cigarette smoke. I didn't really notice it then, as it was just something I was used to. Nobody seemed to know about the health hazards of smoking, and Uncle must have smoked about 60 senior service cigarettes a day. These were shorter than today's cigarettes, but very strong and untipped. Dad smoked a pipe, and then roll-ups, homemade cigarettes, but nothing like as much as Uncle. Uncle could not read music, but he could play some tunes by ear. As a background to my childhood, I remember him accompanying himself as he sang the comic songs Abdullah Bulbul Amir and O Rafferty's Pig. We loved those, and as we got older we sang along with him. There were other old humorous songs that we enjoyed too. Some months before I was born, Uncle bought a German Shepherd puppy, Fritz. The term German Shepherd wasn't used, mind you, due to wartime connotations. During these years the breed was known as an Alsatian. Obviously Uncle didn't care, giving him a name like Fritz. Auntie had been rather frightened to have an Alsatian, as one had attacked their previous dog, a Cocker Spaniel. However, she too soon came to love Fritz. For me, he was simply always part of my childhood. Some of the earliest photos show him sitting with me all of his own accord. I think that for him I was his puppy. Uncle trained Fritz well, and he was a very obedient dog. The only thing that strained his patience was if he saw a cat when he was out on the lead, but he had a lovely temperament. Now I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So to go back, apparently, for the first months of my life I was a fractious baby. I think it is hardly surprising, as my mother was terribly anxious. Dad was somewhere in Europe, moving into Germany in the last stages of the war. Added to that, Mum felt rather inhibited living where she was, and feeling she must always be thinking of Auntie and Uncle. She says that there were times when she threatened to throw me out of her bedroom window into the fish pond below, feeling at her wit's end. Auntie could not have children, and there was no real fertility treatment then. Mum felt that she must let her sister have as much of me as she could. So, for example, Mum would offer to do any jobs needed and let Auntie be the one to take me out for a walk. It would seem that Mum and I both started to feel better around Easter the following year. Dad had a short home leave from 6th of March, after being at Nijmegen in the Battle for the Rhine. Then Mum took me for a first visit to her mother in Bayton. Grandma Wallace was apparently well known for her soothing so-called jolly drops. Mum put my quieter mood down to these. Goodness knows what was in them. Various drugs that you don't even see today, such as laudanum, were readily available and in use then. Also, the war was drawing to an end. VE Day was declared not long afterwards, so there was great relief and rejoicing. Even though Dad was still in Germany for some months more, Mum could now see a future and an eventual end to the shared living. At the end of the war, while Dad was in Germany, he was hospitalised. This was not due to enemy action. He had bronchitis very badly. In hospital, he occupied himself making me some soft toys. I remember a navy blue felt elephant with seams blanket stitched in orange. The cream-coloured tusks were so thin that, looking back, I don't know how he managed to stuff them. He also made me an orange duck. And spanning several decades, Dad took up soft toy making again in retirement, still all hand-sewn. Over a period of nearly 20 years, until his sight failed, he made hundreds of stuffed animals and raised a great deal of money for charity with them. Right, back to my narrative. Dad came back to England for good on demob leave in December 1945 and had his first Christmas at home since 1940. When he was discharged in February 1946, he came back to live with us all in Cambridge Street, while my parents waited for a house of their own. But at least Joan and Marge weren't there any longer, so it wasn't quite so crowded. There was a real housing shortage after the war, and a big programme of council house building, social housing, was started in the late 1940s by the government of the day. These were to give ordinary working folk decent, affordable housing. They were much sought after. However, since the estates all had to be built from scratch, families had quite lengthy waits for one. Dad went back to working in his old job for the London Brick Company at Newton Longville, a few miles outside Bletchley on the Buckingham side. He cycled to work every day, as did Uncle to his shop near the station. Despite Dad's ride being longer, he still came home for dinner too. Uncle would leave for work really very early in the morning to prepare for the day ahead. He came home for his breakfast and then opened up the shop at 9 o'clock. Like most, his shop closed for an hour at dinner time in the middle of the day. For his dinner, Uncle followed an old Yorkshire custom, by nearly always having a first course of a plate-sized Yorkshire pudding with gravy and with English mustard on the side. It had to be Taylor's. He had that because he liked it, but it originated in Yorkshire many years earlier, as a cheap way of filling your stomach enough so that you didn't need to eat so much meat in the main course. The only times Uncle changed this routine were when Auntie had made a spotted dick, a steamed suet pudding with raisins, for afters. Then Uncle had no Yorkshire, but he had a lump of that with his main course, including the gravy, instead. I was quite fascinated by this, but I didn't fancy it myself. I liked my spotted dick with bird's custard. Thank you very much. To go back again, Mum took me on visits to my grandmother in Bayton up until Grandma Wallace died. My earliest memories will be from when I was about 2 years old. One is of sitting in the Cambridge Street kitchen between the table and the open door, with the sunshine pouring in, dipping rhubarb sticks in sugar and eating them. The other is of choking on a boiled sweet, being turned upside down and hit on the back by Auntie until it shot out. Although I do not remember this, apparently I really loved butter. If the butter dish were left out where I could reach, I would dip my fingers in to scoop it out and just eat it on its own. This gave Mum the horrors, as not being able to stand butter herself, she even hated wiping my fingers and mouth. In the winter of 1946–47, when I was 2, I wore a matching wool coat and leggings for going out in the cold. Apparently I didn't like having my leggings on and would fight Mum, going rigid and screaming. She'd eventually get so frustrated that she would slap my legs to make me behave. Then she felt dreadful, with me in tears and Auntie wringing her hands. On a happier note, Mum used to cycle quite a lot. She would go to look round the shops in Leighton Buzzard and Newport Pagnell. I went along too, strapped into a very basic rear child seat. I don't remember that either, but I wish I did. Mum always cycled to Newport Pagnell in the spring to buy a bunch of the first daffodils for Auntie. Once, when she had me on board, Mum's bicycle tyre had a puncture as she cycled through a village on the way home from Newport Pagnell. She was really worried, with no way of contacting anyone in Bletchley. However, a good Samaritan saw her plight and saved the day by mending the puncture for her. I had a friend next door at number 14 Cambridge Street whose name was Carol. She was just a bit younger than me, and we used to play together in the back gardens. Her grandfather, who lived with the family, kept chickens in a run at the end of their garden. They were fascinating to a young child, although looking back they were really quite scrawny and smelly. I continued to sleep in a cot, a crib, in my parents' room until the next big event in my life. Auntie and Uncle adopted Ken. I was just 3 years old, and he was 6 months older. He came from a London orphanage and was a poor little scrap at first. He had my cot, moved into Auntie and Uncle's room, and I now slept in a bed in the small back bedroom. In the living room of the house were cupboards built into the alcove either side of the chimney breast. An armchair sat alongside each cupboard. I barricaded my toys between one cupboard and armchair to keep them from Ken. So of course that was trouble. I was not amused with Ken. It did, I know, cause some friction in the household. Looking back, I'm sure, and Mum agrees, that if Dad had not come back from the war, we would have stayed at Cambridge Street, and Auntie and Uncle would not have adopted Ken. In fact, before the adoption, Mum felt so beholden and so sorry for her childless sister that she even considered leaving me to be raised by Auntie and Uncle. She knew that she could have another child. She agonised over this, as she also felt that I could have a better quality of life there, and knew, of course, that they very much loved me, and that I loved them. But she just couldn't bring herself to give me up, as I replied when Mum eventually told me of this, long after I grew up. Much though I loved Auntie and Uncle and my home in Cambridge Street, she is my Mum, and I'm so glad she didn't leave me there. Mind, I do think that Dad might have had something to say about it as well. Anyway, it was not long before not only did Auntie and Uncle come to love Ken, but Mum and Dad grew very fond of him too. He became to me just part of the way things were, another in the main circle of people in my life. It simply didn't occur to me to imagine life without him. This, of course, for me, was after things settled down, following more big changes, as I will describe the next time I come to this.